so excited to see you today, Sachi. Thank you for being on here. Again, I know you're so busy preparing for multiple shows, so thank you for taking the time out to talk about your work.
It's such an honor to be here, Erica. I love your show. I really enjoy listening to your interviews, so I'm honored to be here.
Thank you. Thank you. For all of you tuning in, I first was introduced to Sachi years ago at Boston. And I also had the privilege of working with her this past summer at Chautauqua, where she had such an impact on our residents. I mean, people really enjoyed working with you, learning from you, getting feedback from you. And I know people were also really inspired by your artist talk that you gave. So I'm excited to be able to dive into some of that today in the interview.
That's great. Thank you.
So to start out, I always just love hearing background stories. And I know you have a really
Mhm.
great background story. So could you share with the listeners how you first started to really kind of get into the arts, how that kind of manifested for you?
Definitely. I was a maker since I was a child. I love to make things. Everybody who knows me now associates me with cardboard. I made a lot of things with cardboard growing up. And in kindergarten, they had a wood table set up for like about a month, and you could just nail things together and cut it up. And I became obsessed with this and asked my parents for my own tools in kindergarten. So I have like a small hammer, which I still own, a small saw, and I would just go in the basement and I used to make animals out of wood.
Huh.
Yeah.
Love that. And I love that your parents like gave you the tools,
Oh
because I
yeah.
today so many people are like, oh, they're gonna get hurt, but it sounds like
Hmm.
it really set something off in you, lit something in you, you
Oh,
know?
definitely. Right. And I
Mhm.
don't think I knew about sculpture then, but I knew that I wanted to make things.
So then take us forward to so you became really interested in like woodworking,
Hmm.
or maybe like creating these animals and doing these different things. We're not exactly aware of potentially sculpture or what this could
Hmm.
become. Can you tell us when that started to really come to you, or you started to think, wait, there's something I can make with this and
Hmm.
express?
It definitely clicked in college. I started out as a science major in college, but then my friend took a sculpture class and said, "Hey, I think you might like this." And then that set off an avalanche. I majored in art, but I also did my pre-med. There was a woodworking class at Mass Art. I was at Amherst College, and so I took that and I learned about carving and using all the tools. And then I was able to make a thesis my senior year in college. But at that time, I didn't realize that I could actually pursue this as a career or as a focus. And so I went and became a science teacher after college.
How long did that last?
That lasted 3 years. And then I ran into a good friend of mine from college, Mary Henderson, who had gone to Brandeis for the post-bac. And then she also went to grad school at UPenn. And we started hanging out with each other. It's kind of funny. I was actually waiting for a parking space and she was pulling out of that parking space. And I feel like that's such a good metaphor because I took her parking space. And she really said she told me about Chautauqua. She told me about Brandeis. And that just I feel like my whole art career has been like the art process, just following the next step and responding to the process.
I love that. Following the next step and following the process, um,
Mhm.
which I love thinking about your work, and also this path in your life of having this wonderful encounter with a
Mm.
friend who then you followed up with. And I think it's also like the power of community and sharing,
Oh yeah.
sharing what we're doing, but also sharing
Mhm.
opportunities, which it sounds like happen. And then you were able to keep moving forward.
Exactly. Yeah. I think it took me until my age now to realize how important community is as an artist,
Mhm.
just connecting with people, not because it's transactional or you want something, but it's really just the support, knowing that other people are out there doing what you're doing and they're as serious as you are about that this is a very important thing.
Yeah, because it's interesting, like community in the arts, right? Because
Mhm.
we work, by ourselves so much in the studio,
Exactly.
and
Yeah.
we love it. Like
Mhm.
we want that. Uh,
Right. Hmm.
but like you were saying, like it's showing up for other people's shows. But even more than that is like being in your space working and
Hmm.
then having a thought of somebody who like but before we started this interview, I was talking about how I was moving paintings in my driveway and I thought
Hmm.
of you working out in your driveway.
Yeah.
Even like that type of community, like
Exactly.
Sachi's out there doing the same thing, kind of, I mean, in a way, So
Yeah.
that's beautiful how you mentioned that. I love that. So you decide, okay, this is the thing. I'm gonna do it,
Mhm.
and you start taking the steps. I think what I really love hearing about here is that you had this 3 years of like a different career. Like you were on
Mhm.
this path. And I think there's many artists out there who um also want to make a switch. Maybe
Mhm.
it's a career switch, or maybe, they got out of their BFA and they've started into like a job because we all have to, of
Mhm.
course, support ourselves, but they kind of want to transition over. Could you share a little bit with us about like that time and the thoughts kind of going through your head and how you kind of put it together?
Don't think I ever made conscientious decisions, but I think we lay clues down for ourselves throughout our lives. Like even my in kindergarten, the fact that I was drawn to the table and wood, or in college, I think about where did I want to spend my time? Was it in the lab or was it in the studio? I think it's trusting your intuition too, or your gut feeling, and not being scared off by that. And then also try not to think like 100 steps ahead. Like I always do that. I think, oh, well, if I do that, then how am I going to do this? How will I do this? Um, and I think it's again like the studio process. You can't plan what the final product is. You have to respond to each step that's in front of you at the moment.
What I really love about that too is I feel like, I don't know about you, but I know in my path,
Mhm.
there was times I was just really thankfully naive. I'm like, why not? I'm gonna go do this,
Exactly. Yes.
You're following, like you said, and then you're just
Mhm.
like even starting the podcast, like what could, yeah,
Mhm.
let's just do this.
Exactly. Yeah.
And then it leads to something bigger and you build
Mhm.
on it. That I think is just so, so powerful.
Oh,
Um,
yeah.
can you take us back then to like you decide this is it, this is where I'm going. Um,
Mhm.
like that you build a thesis in your undergrad, and then you went on to graduate school.
Mhm.
And coming out of graduate school after that, can you tell us a little bit like, okay, did you start teaching at that point as well, or?
I did it, because I actually applied for a job teaching science in a high school, and luckily I did not get that job. And
Thank God for
instead,
closed doors occasionally, right?
right, yeah, the universe said no.
Yep, yep, not going
And
there.
then I started doing adjunct all over Boston, and it was because I liked doing it, but it was also a means to like make money. And then I tried to put all my part-time jobs on like 2 or 3 days, and then the rest of the week I would just go to the studio. And all my decisions were based around how can I get into the studio? How can I make work? And it wasn't because I felt like I had to, but it was because it was like an inner drive.
I think that's really important what you're saying
Mhm.
there too. Like it was this inner drive that you wanted to be in the studio, and that was like your rock. Like that's what you kind of held
Oh,
on to,
yeah.
and everything
Mhm.
else kind of builds around it.
Right.
Um, and I think that's a really like honest way to go about it and
Mhm.
like honoring yourself, but also a practical thing. I think
Definitely.
there's so many things to juggle out there, but we have to have like our one core thing, like this is it,
Mhm.
you know
Exactly.
and build around it.
Mhm.
So now you have this fabulous studio.
I do. It's my dream studio.
Tell us about your studio and about a day in the studio for you now.
Oh, I love my studio. I think I work really well having a studio behind my house. So it was originally a two-car garage, and I bumped up and built a second story, which is where I am now. And I do really well because a lot of times I just have an hour or 2 hours, and it's so easy just to run out, do a few things, and then just go back to something, go back to work or whatever I need to do. My typical day in the studio, I love coming into my studio with my coffee and just sitting and looking at the beginning and just sitting there. And then I like making lists.
Mhm.
I think it helps me. It's actually do things or accomplish things. I don't always finish my list, but I think it helps me set up my day in my head. It tells me what I'm supposed to do. I like to draw a lot at the beginning too. I feel like it's almost like doing your scales if you're playing piano. It warms you up. Um, and then I tend to hyper focus on things. So I'll just work on one thing for hours. Yeah. I'm trying to make myself bounce around a little bit more so that things will communicate with each other better. But it's hard not to just go down that rabbit hole. You
Sachi, I
relate.
feel like you're like talking directly to my heart right now.
Really?
That
Oh, I
was like
love
this
that,
morning
Erica.
before we got in here. I was,
Yeah.
this pain. I'm kept being like, you need to stop,
Hmm.
let it sit, go to the other ones, bring it together,
Exactly. Right. But yeah, I could easily just get 12 hours just focus on just one thing,
Mm.
which
I love your drawings. Can you talk a little bit more? Just like so your drawings are your warm-ups, and I may have even asked you this over the summer because they're really beautiful. Um, do you ever see yourself like showing any of those anywhere, like your drawings, or are they just always kind of like a personal warm-up space for you?
I do think of as a personal studio thing, which I tend not to show, but obviously, like I put one behind my head today. I think so many of my friends are painters and 2D artists that I tiptoe in that area when it comes to bringing it out into the public. But I also sabotage myself. I get so nervous if I have like really nice paper. So sometimes I just draw on the crappiest piece of paper that's in my studio.
I get that. I so get that. Um, I can do that too. But I love this idea of conversation that you have between the 2D and the
Mhm.
3D in your work. Like it's just for me, a non-sculptor, one of those
Mhm.
2D people, I think there's like so much magic in a way because you have to like transform. I mean, we're all transforming
Mhm.
ideas, right? But then like I don't go make a sculpture or like, a maquette of sorts. And then
Right.
maybe I should though. I guess some painters do. But like you are having that process. And I think that there's just something really beautiful that comes through in your work where there is this composition and movement that I see, that's really, really special and has this voice to it. So I'd love to hear a little bit about like how you're starting a piece. So you do your sketches and stuff.
Mhm.
Take us through like how you would start one of your sculptures.
Um, so the sketches and drawings never plan a sculpture.
Mhm. You'll
It's
just go.
really an idea generator, and a lot of times I'll go into drawing and just pull out one thing from it, and
Mhm.
that will inspire me. Like I did a whole series of drawings this summer. I was looking at Japanese prints of water, and I was just drawing the water forms because I love how abstract those forms are. And in my head, when I look at it, it just easily translates into a sculpture or form. Um, right now, I've been working a lot in parts, which I find really helpful because I used to just carve from a solid block and it gave me so few options for moving things around. And I like that I can take things from my drawings and I have like so many different parts lying around my studio and I can play with things. And sometimes the actual part I have I don't use, but it helps spark an idea for what I can make. It's very the piece behind me right there looked none of the original pieces are in the final piece. Everything got swapped out. it moved that much.
I love that. That feels, yeah, yeah. And one thing I've noticed, and I
Mhm,
wanted to ask you about this is, um, do you feel like now that there's these modular pieces,
mhm.
that the narrative can kind of shift, within the piece, and it does as you create it? Is that part of it, or?
I think it is. I think a lot about the word narrative, and I don't think narrative is quite the right word because that makes me think like a storyline, but I feel like it's more like just like a phrase or like a moment or an image, if that makes any sense.
Totally. It
It does.
totally.
Yeah.
Yeah. I
Um,
Do you feel like the phrase, like then the like idea in there kind of shifts as,
Definitely does.
yeah. Okay.
Yeah. And I like
Okay.
that then there's more room for discovery in that way too. Like you
Mhm.
could start with a one idea, but just by moving something like putting it upside down or swapping something else in, everything can completely shift. And
Mhm.
I enjoy that.
Mhm.
And I also enjoy the idea of trying not to make everything make clear sense. Like I don't want it to be a narrative. It can be more open-ended and suggestive.
Mhm. Mhm. When you're in the process of
Mhm.
responding to the piece and kind of adjusting, and like the idea is growing, shifting, morphing, you know, is that influenced by like what's happening around you, or is it from things like you're reading? I'm curious, or is it just like the piece itself and just responding to the piece and thinking like, no, that has to shift?
I think it's a combination of all those things, and sometimes it's not exactly clear where the influence is coming from, but I do like to feed myself with as many like I try to look a lot at art, and then reading like a lot of fiction. Actually lately I've been reading a lot of nonfiction, so like about tree science.
Very
And yeah, and if that might not directly show in my work, but it sparks an idea. And I hope that like there could be hints of that in the work, like people can sense some of these things, but it's never explicit.
What I'm really interested in what, what I love about this is that it becomes like this very, and I don't know if I want to say personal either, but like it is your work from your experience, you know what I'm
Right.
saying? And the
Mhm,
ideas that you are bringing in, and then maybe it's part of it that goes into it, or it's whole, or it's like
mhm,
you know, and I think that's really beautiful. It is the work that I think I respond to the most sometimes, where
mhm,
it's not A plus B goes to C, you know?
mhm. Yeah.
Um, and like you said, there is this open-endedness to respond and work with it. And I wanted to also then ask about the animals, because I love the animals in your work. And I personally love symbols and the idea of symbols.
Mhm.
Could
Me
you
too.
talk a little bit about that in your work?
It takes me a long time to actually adopt a symbol. Like I'll spend a lot of time drawing it or trying to read about it. I like to have things that I can look at from many different perspectives that doesn't just have like one clear meaning to it. Like the symbols I think are so personal, but then when I go out into the world, like I'll see another artist and they're drawn to all the same things. I think it's universal. And
Mhm.
I think that's what I hope makes it interesting that it does seem very personal and specific, yet open.
Mhm. Mhm. Yeah, that's why I felt like I started trying to read about like, the collective consciousness, um, and
Mhm,
like Jungian symbols that, predate us and
mhm,
predate cultures, and, like how we respond to those, because
mhm.
I think there is like this truth to it.
Oh, yeah.
So, and I remember when you were giving your artist talk, there was an animal that you had been working with that you had felt like really drawn to. I
Great
forget.
blue heron, maybe?
Yeah, that was it, the great blue heron. Can you talk a
Um,
little bit about that too? Because I thought that
I
was really.
haven't used it lately, but it's definitely on my mind. the crane is such an important symbol in Japan. Longevity, luck. Um, and I I feel like some I live in both worlds. I definitely have a Japanese part of myself, but I grew up here. I was born here. And so I want to find an American version of that symbol. And at that time, I used to run in Boston, and there was a great blue heron that lived on the river in Brookline, and I would see it all the time, and it started to generate these ideas for me. It's such a um, fascinating animal to look at because it almost looks like a ghost to me. Like most of the times I don't see it right away, then suddenly you just realize it's standing there completely still in the water and it's wiggling its toes under the water. So the above the water is completely still, but it's wiggling its toes because they look like worms. And then the fish come towards the worms and then they suddenly move and grab it. And I love that difference between that perfect stillness, and then when they fly, they're so magnificent too. And for me, that became my American version of the Japanese symbol. And I, it keeps coming back in my work, and I think it's going to come back again pretty soon.
Oh, I love that. And you're talking when you were describing it too, it makes
Mhm.
me like the way you were describing the heron made me think about how a lot of times I encounter your work. Like there's this stillness, yet not stillness to it, like
Mhm.
a power in it. And I know I've shared this story with you before, but the first time I saw your work before I met you,
Mhm.
and it was like I love looking at work. There's a lot of good work. And then you sometimes have a really great experience with work.
Mhm.
And your work I had an experience with, like seeing these figures that you had built and like I wasn't prepared for it. I didn't know
Yeah.
they were going to be there. And then like I'm confronted with this and I was like taken aback, and I think that moment of being for me like the stillness, but then like this jolt
Mhm.
is something incredible that art can do where it takes you out of the everyday and then
Mhm.
you kind of come back into it but you're slightly changed because you had this experience. So when you talk about the heron it just makes me think of your work.
Oh, I love that you draw that connection between those things. That's exactly the presence I want my work to have, where you're aware of this thing and it
And
has
it
this,
totally happens. It
oh
totally
yeah,
happens when I encounter
exactly.
your
And
work.
it's like such a lofty goal, but I want to have that like presence to my work.
I love that. And you do. I would love to go now. Like you have incredible work. Um, and you're also a fabulous mind and teacher and generous with students.
Oh, thank you, Erica.
Yeah, it's true. I mean, I received that like just in proximity to seeing you teach.
Mhm.
And do you feel like teaching has impacted your practice, like your studio practice?
I think I became a better artist because of teaching. I needed it. I think teaching really makes you have to define for yourself what you think art is, and it makes you think about how you approach making work. Um, you have to really look at yourself pretty deeply to understand what you want to communicate to students. I uh, I also in my classes, I don't know if I should admit this. A lot of times there are things I'm trying to figure out in my work. Well, I think it worked reverse wise. I was having my students work modularly because I think it really helps them to not commit to something right away and to be able to move things around. And then I think that's what fed into my work and made me work modularly too. So I was going to say that I make my students do something that I want to figure out, but I think it happened more organically than that.
Well, it kind of comes back to this idea of like living a life as an artist, where these
Mhm.
things happen and then you kind of
Right.
respond to it or pull it in, whether it's like an idea in a book or a thought in a book, or, running and seeing
Mhm.
something and putting it together, or, having to come up with new things for your students to do to best serve them. And then you're like, oh, wow,
Exactly. Right. Yeah. Like, "Oh, I should do that in my own
Oh,
studio."
I love that. Um, so when you're in the classroom and working with
Mm.
students, is there like some advice that you feel like has really served them well? Or is there like advice that you have received that you'd like to share with people that has helped you on your journey?
That's such a good question. I think one of the biggest things I try to help my students with is a lot of times, especially if it's their first time making art, a lot of times they just wanna plan things start to finish even before they make something. And so it goes back to this idea of responding to the process and responding to the material too. So you can't force a material to do something that it doesn't want to do. And that's something that I love doing in my work. And I think adding all these other materials on top of the wood has been really exciting for me. Just trying to understand how all these different materials work and what they can do by themselves and then together too.
Yeah, that was something I loved, going into your studio over the summer. And I saw that it looked like you were starting to add, I want to say, was there gold, like some type of gold
Mhm.
leafing or gold? And that was
Yeah.
just really interesting from an outside perspective, because
Mhm.
like the feeling of gold is soft and wood can be soft, but also like there's a difference there, and like the shine, like, I just really
Mhm.
interesting.
I never personally wear gold, but in my work, I've just been obsessed what it can do now. So I wasn't able to get a shot of the piece to share with you, but I am gold leafing things. And it's interesting because when a solid's reflecting light off of it, it almost makes it less solid in a way. And I like that contradiction. And then also just it's just becomes so special or magical, this shiny material. I've been I'm tempted to just gold leaf everything. It's just although that'd be really expensive.
Yeah, right, right.
Yeah.
Well, it's making me even think about like how we were talking about symbols and collective
Mhm.
consciousness and historical things, and
Oh,
gold is
yeah.
precious,
Definitely.
And I
Mhm.
think that was like kind of one of the things when I saw, I can't remember, I think I can kind of picture it. There was like a hand, and something about the symbol of a hand and then this precious gold. It made me, I don't know. I just thought that was like this really beautiful fusion that was starting to
Mhm.
take place.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, and so I think it's awesome. Now, when did you start bringing in other materials? Was that another recent thing with the modular, like that you started using those, or had you started previously?
I've been doing that for a really long time, but just like little, bite-sized pieces.
Mhm, mhm.
And lately, it's really taken over my process more.
Did you also bring cloud? You've had clouds in
Yeah.
before too,
Oh,
but I
yeah.
remember there was
I
like
have
a
clouds.
I felt like
Mhm.
maybe it was like the way it was placed compositionally in your work,
Mhm.
you know?
Definitely, yeah.
Mhm.
So, I've been making clouds with resin and then making gold leaf clouds. Uh, yeah.
I'm very excited to see all this work. You have just been like in the studio, hitting the
Oh,
ground.
yeah. Talk about hyper focus. All my life right now is just teach, studio, teach, studio.
And you have some upcoming shows. So could you share
Mhm.
with us those upcoming shows? So I'm
Definitely.
hoping to be at least at one of them. So
That would make me so happy. I am thrilled about this. I have a three-person show at Mrs. Gallery in New York, and that's in January. So excited about this. And
it's going to
then
be awesome. Sorry.
oh, oh, it's just the best op I love the work that she shows, and I'm excited about being a part of that, program. And then the other show is actually, not for a while, for another year. I think it's 2026. I always forget what year it is. We're in 24 now. So in 26 in January at the Center for Maine Contemporary Art. That's in Rockland. They have this beautiful space and I have a solo show there.
Oh,
Oh,
congratulations.
thank you. And that's where the gold is. I've I've started weaving a gold net, and I had that at Chautauqua. And I'm hoping that I can weave a net that can fill a lot of the room. I'm
Wow.
hoping, yeah, you can walk in the room and just have this huge gold net in the center.
That's incredible. Like just thinking of that. Well, this is amazing. We'll be sharing the show that's coming up very soon at
Yeah.
Mrs. Gallery. Again, congratulations. And then the upcoming solo exhibition there at this amazing space. So you've got so many things happening. And Sachi, again, I just want to thank you for being on here and for being, I just think a light in a lot of ways,
Oh,
so thank you and congratulations.
thank you, Erica. It's
All
been a
right.
real pleasure.
Yeah, yeah. I was been looking forward to this for a while. So
Me too.
all right, thank you so much and have a good day.
You too.
Bye.